Day 87. Daniel Torres sat in his small Mexico City apartment, laptop open to a one-way flight back to Minneapolis. His hand hovered over the purchase button. 51 years old. $28,000 left in savings. No job, no wife, and for the past 3 months, no idea if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. 2 years earlier, he'd been living what looked like the American dream. Beautiful house in the suburbs, steady accounting career, 25-year marriage. His friends envied him. His family was proud. But Daniel was dying inside. When he finally admitted the truth and left, everyone called him selfish, reckless, having a midlife crisis. His decision to move to Mexico City, a place he'd never even visited, confirmed everyone's worst fears about him. And for the first 87 days, they were right to worry. This is the story of what those first 90 days in Mexico City actually looked like, the parts no one talks about when they romanticize starting over, the crushing loneliness, the fear that grows at 3 a.m., the moment on day 89 that changed everything. Because what happened at that random café wasn't what Daniel expected, and it taught him something about reinvention that no self-help book ever mentioned. If you want more true stories of bold decisions and the people who risk everything to reinvent their lives, subscribe now so you never miss the next leap. Minneapolis, 2022. Daniel had the kind of life that made sense on paper. Senior accountant at a mid-sized firm, $130,000 a year, 3-bedroom house in Edina with a 2-car garage, 25 years married to Jennifer, his college sweetheart, 2 adult kids who'd moved out but came home for holidays. Sunday mornings followed the same pattern they'd followed for 2 decades. Coffee at 7 a.m., Jennifer reading the newspaper, Daniel checking work, emails, even though it was the weekend. Polite conversation about nothing that mattered. Did you call the contractor about the deck? She'd ask. I'll do it Monday, he'd reply. 25 years of that. 25 years of marriage that had stopped being a marriage somewhere around year 7, but neither of them had the courage to acknowledge it. They weren't fighting. They weren't cheating. They were just existing in parallel lives under the same roof. 2 people who become roommates with shared financial obligations. Daniel knew he was unhappy. He'd known for years. But at 49, with a comfortable salary and an established life, what was he supposed to do? Start over? Throw away everything he'd built? That's what his mind told him. Anyway, his body was telling him something different. Insomnia that kept him staring at the ceiling until 2 a.m., anxiety that made his chest tight during client meetings, a persistent feeling of being trapped in a life that belonged to someone else. He'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Morrison, a woman in her 60s who'd heard versions of his story 1,000 times before. What would happen, she asked him one Tuesday afternoon, if you actually admitted the truth out loud? Daniel stared at the ceiling of her office. Everyone would think I'm selfish, he said finally. My kids would be disappointed. My parents would be ashamed. I'd lose the house. I'd lose half my retirement. I'd be starting over at 50 with nothing. And if you don't, she pressed. He was quiet for a long time. I'll die like this, he said. Comfortable, safe, and completely dead inside. The decision came on a Thursday in March, in the most unexpected way possible. Daniel's father had a stroke. Not massive, but serious enough. 78 years old. Rushed to the hospital at 4 a.m. Daniel drove through the dark Minneapolis streets, hands shaking, the kind of fear that makes time feel both too slow and too fast. His dad survived. Doctors said he'd probably recover most of his function with physical therapy. But sitting in that hospital waiting room at sunrise, watching his father sleep with tubes and monitors attached, Daniel felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a voice from heaven. It was quieter than that. It was a simple, brutal realization. Time doesn't wait for you to be ready. His father had spent his whole life planning for retirement. Saved carefully. Worked hard. Made the responsible choices. And now here he was at 78, facing the possibility that those golden years he'd been waiting for might never fully arrive. Daniel was 49. If he lived as long as his father, he had maybe 29 years left. How many of those would he spend pretending everything was fine? He went home that morning and told Jennifer they needed to talk. The conversation lasted 4 hours. There was crying, anger, confusion. But there was also something else, a recognition in Jennifer's eyes that she'd been waiting for this too. "I'm not happy either," she admitted finally. "I haven't been for years. I just thought I don't know, keep going." They decided on a divorce. Amicable as these things go. No lawyers yet. They'd figure out the details. But they both knew it was over. What Daniel didn't tell Jennifer, what he didn't tell anyone, was the other decision taking shape in his mind. He'd been following this travel blogger who'd moved to Mexico City. Random Instagram posts about living abroad, cafe culture, cost of living. Daniel had never traveled internationally much. Never really wanted to. But now, staring at the wreckage of his old life, the idea planted itself. What had he just left? Not just the marriage. Not just the house. Everything. Mexico City. A place he'd never been. Didn't speak the language. Knew almost nothing about. It was insane. Reckless. Exactly the kind of thing a responsible 49-year-old accountant should never do. Which was exactly why some part of him knew he had to do it. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Jennifer got the house. They'd agreed on that. Daniel took his half of savings, $68,000. His kids barely spoke to him. His daughter sent a single text. "I don't understand why you're doing this to Mom." His son stopped returning his calls altogether. His colleagues at the firm threw him an awkward goodbye party, cake in the break room, forced smiles. Nobody knew quite what to say to the guy who was quitting his stable career to move to Mexico. "You'll be back," his manager said, trying to sound encouraging, "when you're ready to be serious again." June 15th, 2023. Daniel boarded a one-way flight to Mexico City with 2 suitcases and $28,000 in his bank account. He'd spent $40,000 on settling debts, legal fees, and preparation. He had no job lined up. No apartment secure beyond the first month's Airbnb. No friends waiting for him. He'd taken exactly 3 Spanish lessons on Duolingo. The first week was okay. Novelty carried him. The Airbnb was in Roma Norte, a trendy neighborhood he'd researched online. Cafes and street tacos, and the exciting feeling of being somewhere completely new. Week 2, the novelty started wearing off. Week 3, reality hit. The loneliness was crushing. Not romantic loneliness, like in movies. Real loneliness. The kind where you go entire days without having a real conversation with anyone. Where you sit in cafes surrounded by people laughing in a language you don't understand. Feeling more isolated than if you were alone. He'd walk through Chapultepec Park on Sunday afternoons, watching families and couples, and wonder what the hell he'd done. The practical problems multiplied. Finding an apartment was harder than expected. Most landlords wanted references he didn't have, deposits he couldn't afford to tie up. He ended up in a small 1-bedroom in Condesa that cost more than he'd budgeted. His savings were evaporating. $800 a month for rent, $300 for food, $200 for utilities and phone. Miscellaneous expenses that added up faster than he calculated. At this rate, he had maybe 14 months before he'd be broke. He tried to work remotely, picking up freelance accounting jobs on Upwork. But the time zone differences were brutal, and competing with accountants in the Philippines who'd work for $15 an hour meant he barely made enough to cover groceries. By day 60, depression set in properly. Not the kind he could push through with willpower. The kind that made getting out of bed feel like moving through concrete. He'd made a horrible mistake. That became clearer every day. His therapist back in Minneapolis. They were still doing Zoom sessions, tried to be supportive, but even she seemed concerned. "Daniel, maybe it's time to think about a backup plan," she said gently one Tuesday morning. "There's no shame in recognizing when something isn't working. Translation, come home, admit defeat, prove everyone right." Day 75. He accidentally walked into the wrong neighborhood late at night. Sketchy streets he didn't recognize. 2 guys started following him. He practically ran back to a main road, heart pounding, humiliated by his own fear. Day 80. He spent an entire afternoon crying in his apartment. Just sat on the floor and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. For the marriage he'd wasted, for the relationship with his kids he might have destroyed, for the comfortable life he'd thrown away. Day 87. He opened his laptop and searched for flights back to Minneapolis. One-way ticket, leaving in 3 days. He could crash with his brother until he figured things out, find a new accounting job, rebuild something that made sense. His hand hovered over the purchase button, and then his phone buzzed. The text was from his daughter, the first one in 3 months. Just 2 sentences. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about not wanting to waste your life. Can we talk sometime?" Daniel stared at his phone for 5 full minutes. Then he closed the laptop with the flight search still open, grabbed his jacket, walked outside into the Mexico City afternoon. He didn't have a destination, just needed to move, process what he'd just read. He ended up at a café in Culiacan, a neighborhood he'd only visited once before, ordered a coffee in broken Spanish, sat at an outdoor table watching the plaza. That's where he met Roberto. Roberto was 67, Mexican-American from San Diego who'd moved to Mexico City 15 years earlier, retired engineer. He was sitting at the next table, reading a book in English, and noticed Daniel's obvious American-ness. "First time in Mexico City?" Roberto asked in perfect English. 3 months, Daniel replied, "though it feels like 3 years. Roberto laughed. The first 3 months. The hardest part. They started talking. Just 2 Americans in a foreign city. But as the conversation went on, Daniel found himself admitting things he hadn't admitted to anyone. The divorce, the escape, the crushing loneliness, the fear that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Roberto listened without judgment. When Daniel finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know what your problem is?" Roberto said finally, "You're still living like a tourist, waiting for Mexico City to make you happy instead of building a life here." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "You came here to escape something," Roberto said, "but you can't escape yourself. You brought all your Minneapolis problems with you, the isolation, the depression, the feeling of being stuck. You just changed the geography." The words hit harder than Daniel expected. "So what do I do?" Daniel asked. Roberto smiled. "Stop running away from Minneapolis. Start running towards something here. Make friends. Learn Spanish properly, not with an app. Find a community. Use your skills to help people. Build something instead of just surviving." He paused and added, "Mexico City doesn't need another sad gringo drinking coffee alone. It needs people who actually want to be here." They talked for 3 more hours. Roberto introduced him to the concept of residency versus presence, physically being somewhere versus actually participating in it. Before they parted, Roberto gave him something unexpected, an invitation to a weekly gathering of expats and locals who met to practice English and Spanish together. Tuesday evenings. Same cafe. "Come if you want," Roberto said. "Or don't. But if you're going to stay here, you need to stop being invisible." That night, Daniel didn't book the flight to Minneapolis. Instead, he opened his laptop and did something different. He researched Spanish classes, joined a Mexico City expat Facebook group he'd been lurking in for weeks, responded to a post from someone looking for accounting help for their small business. Small things, but they felt different than the previous 87 days of just surviving. Day 89, Tuesday evening. Daniel showed up at the cafe. There were maybe 15 people there, mixed ages, some Mexican, some American, some from other countries. They paired up to practice conversation. 30 minutes in Spanish, 30 minutes in English. Daniel's Spanish was terrible, embarrassingly bad. But something happened when he stopped caring about being perfect and just tried to communicate. People were kind, patient, genuinely interested in helping. At the end of the evening, a woman named Anna asked if he'd be interested in helping her sister's small business with bookkeeping. Nothing major, just a few hours a week. She could pay cash. It wasn't much, $200 a week for what amounted to basic spreadsheet work. But it was the first thing in 89 days that felt like building instead of just surviving. 6 months later, Daniel was sitting at the same café where he'd met Roberto, but everything was different now. He was speaking Spanish. Not fluently, probably never would be at his age, but well enough to have actual conversations, well enough to order food without anxiety, well enough to make jokes and understand when people were joking back. The bookkeeping work for Anna's sister had led to 2 more clients, then 4, then 8. He wasn't making Minneapolis money, but he was making enough, $1,500 a month from freelance work. In Mexico City, with his rent and simple lifestyle, that was enough to stop the bleeding of his savings. He joined a gym, started running in Chapultepec Park every morning, met a group of guys who played pickup basketball on Saturday afternoons, mix of locals and expats, ages ranging from 30 to 65. The Tuesday language exchange had become the anchor of his week. He rarely missed it, had become friends with several of the regulars. His relationship with his kids was slowly recovering. His daughter had visited for a week in September, stayed in his small apartment. They'd had real conversations for the first time in years, not about the divorce, not about blame, but about life, about choices, about fear and courage. "I think I get it now," she'd said one evening over tacos. "Why you left. I don't know if I could do it, but I understand why you had to." His son still wasn't ready to talk. Maybe wouldn't be for years. That hurt. But Daniel was learning to sit with that hurt instead of being destroyed by it. Was life perfect? No. He still had hard days. Still got lonely. Still sometimes questioned whether he'd made the right choice. But here's what was different. He didn't feel dead inside anymore. There was something about walking through Coyoacán on a Sunday afternoon, stopping for coffee at a place where the owner knew his name, having a conversation in broken Spanish with a neighbor about the weather. These small, ordinary moments felt alive in a way his Minneapolis life never had. His therapist noticed a change in their Zoom sessions. "You sound different," Dr. Morrison said one Tuesday morning. "Your voice, your energy, something shifted." "I stopped trying to figure out if I made the right decision," Daniel said. Started focusing on making it the right decision. That was the real breakthrough. Not the moment on day 89, but the realization that came after. Reinvention isn't about landing in the perfect place. It's about becoming someone who can build a life anywhere. Mexico City hadn't saved him. He'd saved himself by finally choosing to actually live somewhere instead of just hiding from his old life. The money situation stabilized. By month 9, he was making $2,000 a month from freelance clients. By month 12, he'd started teaching business English to executives 2 evenings a week, something that combined professional knowledge with the language barrier that had once terrified him. He still had $21,000 in savings. Still no long-term security. Still no idea if this would work 5 years from now. But for the first time since he was maybe 25 years old, Daniel felt like he was actually living his life instead of watching it happen to someone else. Here's what nobody tells you about starting over at 51. The first 90 days will try to destroy you, not in dramatic ways. In quiet, grinding ways. Loneliness, self-doubt, the voice in your head that says everyone was right and you were wrong. And here's the other thing nobody tells you. That voice might be right for the first 87 days. Because reinvention isn't about the decision itself. It's about the 89 days after the decision when nothing is working and you have to decide all over again to actually build something instead of just run away. Daniel's story isn't a fairy tale. He didn't get rich. Didn't find some perfect life waiting for him in Mexico City. Didn't magically solve all his problems by changing geography. What he found was harder and more valuable. The realization that you can't escape yourself, but you can choose who you're becoming. The marriage was dead. That was true in Minneapolis, and it would have been true in Mexico City. But the difference was that in Mexico City, Daniel stopped pretending, stopped hiding, stopped waiting for life to feel right, and started building something that felt real. If you're standing at the edge of your own bold leap, whether the divorce, a career change, a relocation, or any other decision that terrifies you, Daniel's story offers one clear lesson. The leap itself is the easy part. It's one moment of courage followed by months of grinding through the consequences. The real question isn't whether you're brave enough to jump. It's whether you're willing to do the unglamorous work of building a life worth living after you land. Because that's where most people fail, not in the jumping. In the 87 days after when nobody's watching and you're sitting alone in a foreign city questioning everything, Daniel almost bought that ticket back to Minneapolis. Almost gave up. What saved him wasn't courage. It was a random text from his daughter and a conversation with a stranger that reminded him, you can't build a new life while still living your old one, even when your old one is just in your head. Today, he's still in Mexico City, still figuring it out, still having hard days. But when asked if he regrets it, his answer is immediate. Not for a second. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because he finally feels like he's living instead of just existing. And sometimes that's enough. If this story inspired you, subscribe and share it with someone who might be standing at the edge of their own bold leap today.